Okay, this is to me a very, very important question that I want to get out in this podcast. Tell people in your experience, what are the 2 or 3 most important things that people should know about either finding or identifying people that might be susceptible to suicide, or how you deal with a suicide after it happens? What are the 2 most important things about those two or three, or however many you want to talk about? But in your mind, what are the most important things people should know about that?
You know, whenever someone dies, it's just a sad time. You know, my grandmother died a few years ago, and we were just so devastated. She was the matriarch of the family, even though she was about 4'8", and you know, we just loved her. And you know, we got together, and it definitely was a celebration of her life with all the grandkids. But you know, it was hurtful. But I think when someone dies by suicide, there's just so many unanswered questions, especially, you know, if a note is not left, especially because a lot of times people never saw there was any symptoms. They thought this person was happy. So, you know, I think allowing yourself to grieve, finding resources, and for yourself going to speak to somebody and understanding and processing those feelings, because if not, you can easily be caught in that vicious cycle. And, you know, and the other thing people need to realize is mental health can also be hereditary. Now that I look back in my family line and I'm like, oh, I see that and I see that. But once again, we didn't talk about that in our family.
Yeah.
It was like unspoken. Those were just the pills that someone needed to take every day, but they weren't for diabetes or something. It was for something else. So, you know, I think, you know, being able to look back and see, just think about cancer, right? So if someone in your family has cancer, they normally tell you, you know, when you go to the doctor, they ask you, does anyone in your family line have cancer, high blood pressure, diabetes? Maybe you need to do that self-check. Does anyone in our family, have they suffered from this? And now that I know what the signs are, now I can identify, maybe it wasn't put out there, but now I understand what those are. And knowing it's okay to interject yourself. You know, I wish I could interject myself one more time to have my brother here, to hear his voice again, to get one of those hugs, to hear his laughter, his crazy jokes. The fact he wasn't there to see my children graduate or my daughter get married and my son go to college. I mean, my brother is the type of person, he'd probably be hanging out in his nephew's dorm with him and looking at chicks to go out on a Friday night. You know, that was just him. And my son would love every moment of it. So, you know, it's reaching out, getting educated. And if you happen to go through something like this, it is devastating and you can heavily be affected from it. So make sure, you know, you may need to get some help yourself, and that's okay. Whether it's speaking to somebody one time or maybe longer, it's really what you need.
You know, and you said something there which I think is very perceptive. A couple things that are very perceptive. Number one, you talked about the hereditary nature of depression, and that's certainly true. And like we were talking about earlier, Toby, I don't think there's any real difference between, you know, they ask me every time I go to the doctor, do you have a family history of cancer? And I check yes. My mother died of breast cancer, and I don't know that there's any real material difference between that and do you have a family history of mental health issues? Exactly. I mean, there's no real difference, and that's really important. And the other thing that I think I feel compelled to say, and this is actually me talking not as an expert, but this is what an expert, Dr. Carlia East, told me, and this is also in her book. She talks about the fact that some of the time it's just a matter of getting better sleep, better nutrition, better hydration. Like, there are things you can do physically to help. But now there are other situations where you truly do have some wiring that's off in your brain, and then maybe you need some medical interventions and stuff like that. But the point is, there's a lot of resources. It's not like you just have to go to a doctor and they're going to give you some sort of drugs, right? There's